Let's get started. So welcome everybody. My name is Martin Willemink. I'm a co-founder at SecMed and I am a junior faculty at Stanford Radiology. Welcome to the newest Bytes of Innovation webinar. Bytes of Innovation provides a deep dive into the future of medicine, and we do this with renowned experts such as researchers, physicians, investors, and lawyers. And we do it every other Thursday, so we'll have one today, we'll have one in 2 weeks, and so on. The concept is 15 minutes of presentation by the expert, followed by 10 minutes of Q&A, which is moderated by Aline Lutz, the medical director at SecMed, and by me. So make sure to put your questions in the chat so that we can discuss them at the end of the talk. And today I'm very proud to announce that we have Dr. Robert Pearl amongst us. Dr. Pearl was the CEO of the Permanente Medical Group from 1999 until 2017, and he's the former president of the Mid-Atlantic Permanente Medical Group. He led 10,000 physicians and 38,000 staff. He was named one of the modern healthcare's 50 most influential physician leaders, and he's an advocate for the power of integrated, prepaid, technologically advanced, and physician-led healthcare delivery. And he serves as a clinical professor of plastic surgery at Stanford University School of Medicine, and he's on the faculty of the Stanford Graduate School of Business, where he teaches courses on strategy and leadership. He's also author of several best-selling books, such as Mistreated, Where We Think We're Getting Good Healthcare and Where We're Usually Wrong, and Uncaring, How the Culture of Medicine Kills Doctors and Patients. All the proceeds, by the way, of his books go to Doctors Without Borders. So today, Robert Pearl is going to talk about breaking healthcare's technology rules, and he's going to focus on the 3 major barriers for AI acceptance. So Robert, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Martin. And I will not be sharing my screen. I'm just going to be talking with the group. So why does everyone put their video on so we can sort of be as though we're sitting in a room having a seminar, and that would be a little bit more personal and I think positive. I don't have to tell you the problems of American healthcare. We spend nearly double what every other nation in the world does, and we're last in clinical outcomes, last in life expectancy, last in childhood mortality. We have the highest maternal mortality, tremendous disparities in care delivery. And there's no group in this nation that I need to tell the power of AI to than the individuals on this webinar. More specifically, it drives manufacturing across the United States, increasing productivity tremendously. It's really the foundation for Walmart and its distribution centers. We could have days of talking about its successes. But when I look at healthcare, I don't see AI making very much contribution, not in the research, but in the application. So that's what I thought that I'd be able to focus on today. What is standing in the way of what I believe to be one of the most powerful tools capable of propelling American healthcare into the 21st century? What is standing in the way of it happening? And as Martin said, I'm going to be talking about this notion of breaking the rules. It's part of a series that I am writing right now for Forbes on the rules that are left over from the last century and the ways they need to be broken and changed in the 21st century. And any of you that would like more information, go to my website. It's robertpearlmd.com, or and subscribe to my monthly musings. Follow the monthly musings that are published once a month with links to all of the material. Let me start with my view that AI is only as good as the database upon which it is built, and that the AI databases in healthcare are almost a sigmoid type curve. Some of them are close to zero in terms of consistency and reliability of information, and some of them are very good. And the results, the laboratory research results on AI, correlate with these outcomes, or this data availability, and the outcomes correlate with each other. So what is a really excellent database? It's when you have a visual image. X-ray is a great example of that. You can take 10,000 mammograms. You can put 5,000 mammograms that was shown, proven, biopsy proven to be cancer. That's 100%. And on the other side, you can take 5,000 mammograms that 5 years later, the woman has no evidence of cancer. That's a pretty reliable database. You can do the same, by the way, when you're looking at the retinal vessels, or you can do the same when you're looking at skin lesions. So we have certain things that are, I call them highly reliable. And what you find is that AI is capable of reading these studies far better than humans. Radiologists don't want to admit it, but the machinery is, and the application is at least 10% better than humans. And it's going to get better over time as it's done more and more, because AI intrinsically, as you know, is a learning modality. And I believe that at some time in the future, AI will, I think, completely read, but at least pre-read mammograms, difficult to interpret x-rays. The people at Stanford have done the research and published it on this particular area, and in a variety of other areas. Where is it, I'll say, reliable, but not yet, I think, adequately studied? And that's going to be the data coming off of wearable devices. I mean, if you think about it, the blood glucose measurement that someone with diabetes does several times a day is an absolute number. It's not a number for which there is uncertainty. You can question aspects about that number, but it is a clear number. The blood pressure taken off of a device, a monitoring cuff that has a Bluetooth, a scale in someone with heart failure. These are absolute numbers that could be put into an AI application database. But why is it not used, and why is it, I'll call it, more concerning relative to the future? It's because the real application of that is not just the AI study, but it's transmitting that information to the patient. And once you do that, now you have the ability to change the way that medical care is practiced. If you're someone with diabetes, what does the physician say? I'll see you in 3 months or 4 months or 6 months. What do we want to know? Is the patient every day on the right course? Or the blood pressure? Is the blood pressure going in the right direction or not? Why is only 55% of blood pressure patients with hypertension adequately controlled? Because we don't measure it often enough. AI can solve that off of wearable information. So why isn't that available? This is the legal restrictions. If you look at the companies that are out there, the devices that are being provided, and they're out there, the heart monitoring watch is a great example of that, are not designed to apply AI to them in a way to change clinical practice, to raise quality, to increase convenience, and to lower the cost. It could be done. We have the technology today. It would be actually relatively simple, but it's the legal constraints that are sitting between the AI, with the data, and the AI application of it. I don't know how many of you are physicians. The physicians are going to know exactly what I'm saying, but if any of you are not physicians, what's in the electronic health record is junk. Doctors cut and paste. Nothing is exact. The measurements have very little ability to be replicated. AI analyzing the EHR is next to worthless because it's not going to have the scientific basis. And when AI is looking at data that is, I'll say, unclean, it not only is not exact, it's actually problematic because it finds things that don't really exist. And they exist because of the failures of physicians to adequately enter that data information. So if I had to look at this, I think we're going to find that the visual AI is coming on. Doctors are going to resist it. I'm going to talk about why in a few minutes, but the applications are going to be great. I think the biggest opportunity is in the wearables. We're just going to have to get over the legal constraints. And I think the EHR as a source of information is next to worthless because of how unreliable the data is in it. I think the second problem with the AI is that it can't take out the human bias. So AI is not able to undo that. And obviously the problems that happened with United Healthcare when it wanted to identify patients who were at most need of intervention. They wanted to give to these individuals added medical care in order to avoid the patient needing a hospitalization or becoming critically ill and needing a major procedure or admission to the ICU. And you may remember that when the AI did the analysis, only 17% of patients identified were African Americans, whereas when humans went in there and looked at the clinical diagnoses, it should have been much closer to 50%. And the reason was very simple, that in the American healthcare system, in this case insured by United Healthcare, African Americans received on average $1,800 less medical care per year than white patients. So when the AI application went in there, and I recognize we don't know exactly how the AI works, but if the application went in there, it came to the conclusion that if you needed $1,800 more medical care than the person sitting next to you, you were sicker. And so it selected the wrong individuals, not because the AI was biased, not because the AI was the problem, because it simply mirrored what humans were doing, and dollars spent seemed to the application to be an appropriate measure of disease, sickness, and likelihood of needing high-cost medical care in the future. But I want to stress the possibility that AI actually can be the solution to bias. A really good example of that is we know that early in the coronavirus pandemic, when 2 patients came to the ER and there was a shortage of testing kits, doctors tested white patients twice as often as black patients with equivalent symptoms, despite the fact that we also know that African Americans died 2 to 3 times more frequent. And AI could look at the prescribing, because this is a specific action again, matched up against some biological measures like fever, blood oxygen, et cetera, and be able to say to the clinician, you normally would get a test in this circumstance. Are you sure you don't want to do it? And then provide data to the clinician demonstrating the implicit bias, not the intentional bias. And we have the same issue with African Americans receiving 30 or 40% less pain medication after a procedure. If it deviates from the doctor and there's a specific place you can look for an exact number, because every doctor has to order the certain number of milligrams of a particular medication, that could be a tremendous source. And one of the areas that's most interesting to me is maternal mortality, where black women have a 2.5 times higher mortality rate than the white women. And we don't really understand why, but we could correlate it with the race of the staff. We could correlate it with the care being given through the order set that's provided. There are opportunities for AI to look there. The final reason it's not, I think, being utilized, and I have concerns that it will stay a reason into the future, is that it is undervalued by physicians. And this is why I wrote the book Uncaring, How the Culture of Medicine Kills Doctors and Patients, because we often think that what motivates doctors is money, and money is a factor, but status is equally important. And what you see is that any tool that makes the doctor be special, what's a good example of that? The Operative Robot. I'm sure many of you play video games. This is the ultimate video game. You sit in the back of the room, you have the controls, you're able to move these arms, and it's operating on a human being. What could be higher status than being able to be the one at that control set playing that video game? What's the problem with AI? AI devalues the physician. Now, that's a strange notion if you haven't read the book, because you'd say, okay, AI helps save lives. Shouldn't that elevate the physician? But status is about differentiation. And the idea that a machine is smarter than a doctor, that is problematic when you start looking at it through the lens of status, of hierarchy. The fact that with AI, nurses, nurse practitioners, pharmacists can start to practice as well as, or even better than physicians, this entire area is a threat. And I don't mean an economic threat. Certainly people have talked about that, but I mean a status threat. And I think that may, in the end, be the hardest place to break through. Eric Topol, who many of you know from San Diego, has been in my Fixing Healthcare podcast several times. And he is one of the world's biggest proponents of technology and AI. But if you listen to him, he'll say AI is not going to replace physicians. And I ask you, why not? If it's better than doctors in these areas, why would we not use AI? People say, okay, AI is okay, but we'll do AI at a doctor. Well, if you're going to do that, why are we doing 2 doctors today? Because it's too expensive. So why would we do 1 doctor in AI and not just do AI or 2 AIs? I think that day is going to come. We can debate when it's going to be. My prediction is it won't be about the AI. It's going to be about the societal issues. And with inflation going where it's going right now, the unaffordability of medical care going where it's going right now, it wouldn't surprise me. And I'll add one last piece, which is, you may have heard that Amazon is now going to be offering, at first, I'm sure it's algorithmic solutions to patients, but at some particular point, I think people are going to want to consult AI in situations where they want information and they want it at a cost that they can afford. I see a tremendous possibility for AI, and I think getting through these weeds, both the systemic concerns, but more importantly, the cultural ones, will be the hardest path to blaze. Let me stop at this point and take the questions from the group. I'm happy to go into any of these areas in far greater detail.
This was a great presentation, Dr. Pearl. Thanks for sharing your knowledge. So I have one first question. So as a physician, and I do agree that there's a barrier that from the physicians, that they think that the AI may depower them. But once AI is, or digital health in general, is adopted, how do you think it affects clinical practice?
It will change clinical practice dramatically. I gave the example before, patients with chronic disease. The idea that says that, first of all, even the idea that you have to come to the doctor's office, most of the time, the decisions are not requiring a physical exam. There may be parts. You may want to see the individual's feet to make sure there's no early ulcerations. And in that environment, you could probably do with a telemedicine, but you still may bring the patient in. But as you're managing the blood glucose, and it's simply dependent upon, managing the insulin relative to blood glucose, you don't need to have the person in front of you, but you do need to do it continually. So I think we're going to change the practice. And if we can get the AI applications to be provided through companies, the idea, again, I'd say to you, you have diabetes, here's the insulin that I recommend. I want you to test yourself a certain number of times a day. On your wearable, it will come in, the AI will analyze it. It will tell you every day whether you're okay or not, based upon the information that I give it around the parameters. And I'll see you once a year, but I may not see you any more often, or I may see you again in 3 days. All based. So I think that'll be a tremendous change in chronic disease. I also think that it will be able to look at the major variation that doctors have from evidence-based practice. And it's going to be able to pick up every time that happens and question the physician, which is part of this cultural problem. Doctors don't like to be questioned, certainly not by an AI algorithm in a computer. Maybe if we dressed it up and gave it a white coat, we'd have a different reaction to it. but that's going to be a problem that's going to be there. I think it will offer the opportunity really to start moving the parts of medical care, prevention, avoidance of complications from chronic disease, better overall health, forward very rapidly. And I think that we will end up having as many or maybe even more primary care physicians supported by AI, supported by other team members, and probably need far fewer specialists in the future than we have today.
Yeah, for sure. So I agree that preventive medicine and chronic disease management are two major areas for AI. So there's a question from Igor. So he asks, which is related to what we've been talking about areas of medicine that you see as biggest opportunities for machine learning, but that were not yet realized.
Well, again, Igor, I think the biggest opportunity is off of the wearable devices, because we are making such major progress in developing them. You know, they could be relatively inexpensive. They're often not sold as such. We're getting more and more used to data being transmitted off of our smart watches and other tools. I think this transmissibility and ease of connectivity, AI is the perfect intermediary. Today, no physician wants to receive, as an example, 100 EKGs off of a monitor. A lot of time, not likely to be showing a problem, run that through an AI application. They're not going to want to be able or have the time every single day to monitor, could even be medication adherence. All the tools and things that we know add assistance. And I want to also say that I think that can reduce healthcare disparities, which I think is a major problem today. You know, if you look at why the United States' life expectancy is lagging, childhood mortality is high, it's not distributed equally across races or even socioeconomics. Now, as everyone knows, one of the challenges right now is that sometimes the people who are at greatest problem relative to the healthcare delivery system are also behind in the technological world. But I think a technological solution using AI is far easier to implement. And in the end, it's going to be, I believe, tremendously cost effective. You know, in probably a decade and a half ago, I was in Oregon, and I walked into the health sciences building, and there I saw this sign. It said quality, service, and cost across the top in big bold letters, and at the bottom it said pick any two. That was the mindset of the 20th century. Now we can do all three, and I think that AI in particular, it can allow us to raise that quality, and in raising the quality, do it in ways that are far more convenient today, and as a consequence of better control, prevention, et cetera, dramatically drop the cost. If we do it all through doctors and through nurses and highly paid individuals, it's not going to prove successful. If we do it through technology, as has happened in every other industry, we could literally do it a year from now, 2 years from now. It's not something 20 years in the horizon. It's something that really is right in front of us. It's only a question of whether we want to make the investments. The technology is already sitting in place.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So I think we have tons of more questions to ask, but actually I see that Arvind is raising his hand. So go ahead, ask your question.
Hi. I'm an endocrinologist, so I'll be able to chip in here. I'm sorry I can't turn my video on, but I think my audio is on, so I guess you can hear me. So I'm as equally enthusiastic as Robert in terms of technology. However, I think AI is probably not as relevant in the current discussion yet. And I'll tell you why. I've been in my practice using technology for 2 decades. And we have basically converted diabetes management from an episodic model into a continuous model. In fact, the pandemic was actually a tremendous asset for us because we were able to prove, like Robert said, that we could connect the triad of healthcare, which is access, cost, and quality. We were able to bring, people, we were able to manage people without bringing them in. And we continue to do that this is our 5th year of doing it. But we have compared our data, that means our human managed data, to AI managed data, and we continue to have better results with human managed data than AI. And some of you guys may know a company called DreamEd from Israel. And as of just before the pandemic, their AI algorithm was still far inferior to our human managed algorithms or managed protocols. But what it has allowed us to do, the technology has, is create really organized and patient-centric teams of people that does not involve physicians all the time. So we have different levels of care that we can manage and tackle before it reaches me as a physician. So the opportunity is obviously tremendous, and I think AI based on human interaction would probably give us the most optimal outcome as opposed to AI by itself. That's my take on that so far, at least as of 2022. Thank you.
I agree with you, but I think that's the wrong lens to see it through. The study has to be humans alone versus humans with AI. And I'm going to predict that a human with AI, where the data is collected, curated, organized, and presented on a continual basis through a human being, will be higher quality, far more physician satisfying, and lower cost.
Agreed.
Shot and see.
That's what I said too. I think AI by itself is not going to deliver the goods. It has to be human curated, and because especially in chronic disease, it's not like the surgeons, where the surgeons have all the control over the outcome. 90% of the outcome is our ability to convince the user, which is the patient, to do the right thing at the right time for the right reasons. So, and maintain it for a long period of time. It's not just getting people to goal. That's the hard part. It is maintaining the people once you get them at goal. It's like once you reach Mount Everest, what's your motivation to do anything different, right? That's the challenge. Is people with diabetes may have diabetes for 40 years, 50 years. How do you manage these people in a constant, continuous manner to goal and remain at goal for so many years? And we have done it for 20 years, which is why we have confidence in what we have done. But AI will certainly make our life a lot easier, no question about it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for this contribution, Arvind, and for setting up the discussion here. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. I think we could probably talk about this for a few more hours, but we want to keep it short. So, Robert, thanks a lot for this talk. I think the 3 barriers you mentioned: the AI is only as good as the data, you can't take out the human bias, and AI is undervalued by physicians. I think we couldn't agree more on those 3 barriers. And actually at SecMed, we're trying to tackle the first and trying to work on the second as well. So we are helping, and I think we're thinking in the same direction. We're just not quite there yet, but together, I think we can come up with a lot of solutions and see if we can tackle all these problems in it. So thanks again.
Congratulations, Martin, to you and Aline for a great podcast series. And if anyone wants more information, as I say, my website's robertpearlmd.com. And look forward to watching the group make advances in AI for the benefit of healthcare, and once again, make American healthcare the best in the world. Thank you again.
Thanks a lot. And thanks everybody for attending. I'll see you in 2 weeks where we have the AI director of Viz AI talk.